Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Atoma Eji. This is the second season and the 30th episode. I'm so excited today to have co-hosting with me Roger Lamb and Dr. Richard Rodriguez. We pulled Roger Lamb out of retirement and air balloon jokes to, helium puffing, so to speak, to help us out with the show today. We're interviewing Steve Johnson, who is currently the lead evangelist in the Portland Church. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Go ahead, Mr. Roger.
Steve, this is a dream come true. It's just so grateful how God's woven our lives together since 1976. We're both just really old, I guess, but it's a joy to see you, and I'm so glad Toma set this up. The world needs to know the history of Steve Johnson. So let me just start off with this. Why don't you share with us how you met Lisa and then how you got involved with the ICOC movement?
Well, we were just talking. Hey, Roger and everybody. Thanks for letting me be here. It's good to see you guys, Atoma and Doc. Draco is what we call you over here in Portland. Dr. Rodriguez has told us he's known as Rocco. We call him Draco over here, but Dr. Rocco. But it's good to see you guys, and Roger always. If I keep getting, I've got two 6-month-old puppies that they each weigh about 55 pounds.
Oh,
and hey, if I do that, I'm not talking to Lisa or my daughters. Hey, girls, come on. And they're both little female puppies, but Lisa and I met. We could spend an hour talking about this. I mean, this is the movie I'll make one of these days. But Lisa and I met on the day before Easter in 1976, and I could tell you the details. But I was going to a Christian college in Tennessee, Freed-Hardeman, which even in those days, as conservative as the Church of Christ was known to be, Freed-Hardeman was the conservative school to go to.
That's right.
And how I got there, how they let me in, and how I managed to stay in is another story. But I saw Lisa I just come from a children's theater show that I performed in. I was in a group called Pied Pipers. Years later, we'd start Pied Pipers in our fellowship, but that all came from my mentor, Dr. Hank McDaniel. And we would do shows every other Saturday, cost $0.25, and all the faculty and local people brought their kids. And so I was wearing a blue blouse and a jumpsuit with airplanes all over it. And at this pizza place, and I walked in and I saw Lisa sitting with a girl that I knew who's named Karen. And I said, Karen, who's your friend? Why haven't you introduced us already? Don't you think she'll like me? And I sat down between them and started eating their pizza. And I looked at Lisa and I said, are you an airhead like your friend here? And her first words to me were, you're going to wish I was. And that's where it started. And the very next day was Easter Sunday, and we've been together ever since. And so there's more to that story, but it involves, kissing and, all the mushy stuff. But we'll do that some other time. Lisa had grown up in the Church of Christ, as I had. She's a little bit younger than me. I know it looks like, I always tell everybody, yeah, I was 40 and she was 18 when we got married. I mean, when you look at us, that's what it looks like. But she still looks like she did back then. But she's a couple of years younger than me. And her grandfather was an elder in the Church of Christ. Her family was all in the Church of Christ. But she'd been dating somebody and had been living a pretty wild life from 14 to 18. And I caught her on the rebound from a breakup she'd had, and at a time that she was soul searching and wanting to get back to God. And we got together, and we ultimately, this is sort of the story. A lot of this is kind of the history, the story of the ICOC, because I decided to leave that Christian college that right after that Easter summer came up, and I decided I was going to go back to Illinois and go to school. And I think a week before classes started, I decided to apply to Eastern Illinois University. I'd never heard of it, but I decided to go there because I met Roger Lamb at a youth rally in Illinois, and Roger said I had to come there. They were starting up a campus ministry. I thought he was offering me a job. He wasn't, but he did offer me a room to sleep in, and I got to Eastern Illinois a day before the famous, infamous, wonderful Kip McKean got there. Kip was the campus minister, and this is back when we were all kids and we were dreamy-eyed and had all sorts of visions and ideas, but we were all just babies. And even Roger, I mean, you guys, you and Marcia, yeah, were you even 30 years old yet?
I was 29.
You were okay. You were,
Yeah.
20, you were 29. And but at Eastern Illinois, Lisa would end up coming up. I started there for a semester, and then she came up, and so I was there for 2 semesters, and Lisa was there for a semester with me. And the attraction, Lisa came up because the attraction was I'd never seen so many people get baptized as at this little bitty school. Charleston's a dinky little town. No offense. Oh, I don't care if someone's from Charleston. You know, if someone's from Charleston, they're saying dinky. Or do we even merit that? I mean, it's a tiny little place in the middle of a cornfield, and something really wonderful happened there. They were like 300 kids got baptized in about a year and a half, and I was there for the first half of that sort of. And I had all sorts of attitude issues with Kip. And Roger sort of held my hand and kept me, between the ditches as much as he could. But Lisa and I would run off and get married, and then end up coming back, and I'd search Kip out. I'd hunt him down, and I had sins I needed to repent of, and I said I'd like to learn how to do what you're doing now. I'll tell you now, and for people that watching this, it's. Kip is off doing his own thing. He started another fellowship. Our fellowship is just laden with either people that love the old days or hate the old days, or think that Kip is the Antichrist or whatever. We were kids, completely committed to Jesus Christ. I'd never met anyone more committed to Jesus in my mind at that time than this guy, and we didn't get along. He was just the oddest duck to me. It was just, not that I was odd. I was barefoot wearing overalls in 1976 with my, nothing odd about me, but this fraternity guy that had become a disciple. But I decided when I believed, I'd heard my whole life in the Church of Christ, we're supposed to baptize people. And I'd never seen it done very much. And when I saw it done, and the doctrine that was taught was the same exact stuff I'd heard my whole life, only people were doing it. It was pretty amazing to me. And so, but Lisa and I had some issues, so we ran off and we got married. And then we decided, we worked in a campus ministry in Chattanooga, and we were in not only the first, but the only integrated congregation in Chattanooga. Most of the churches still reflected the segregation that hadn't been dead even 10 years yet. I mean, this is 1977. And we worked with this congregation, the Eastdale Church. And after a little while, Kip's going to move to Boston and work with the Lexington Church of Christ, and invited us to come up and work with them. I was the first, when they had enough money, I was the first guy I was the second addition to the staff. I was the first guy Kip ever appointed evangelist, which is an interesting concept and story all in itself. But at any rate, we ended up going from a pizza place with me basically insulting Lisa into marrying me. and to Boston to work with Kip and to see just this explosive growth. It was just amazing, what happened in Boston in those early years. And we were there for 4 years, and then of course, we were the ones that got. I always felt like I was the luckiest guy in the world. Between being able to be around someone that I thought was just the most effective baptizer I'd ever seen, and getting to marry the person I married, then I got to go to New York. And that was just the most amazing thing. We went to Manhattan to start the church, and we led the group down there in 1983. So anyway.
That's awesome, Steve. I have such great memories from those early days. I'll never forget you pulling up in our driveway in your light blue Mustang, full of everything you had in life. And so he said, "I'm here." I hadn't heard from Steve since I saw him at that youth rally months before. He was the most free-spirited person I'd ever met in my life. And we both got a big kick out of him. But and he stayed in one of our bedrooms. I remember him sitting there playing the guitar. I'm like, do you go to class? This is But the first time he got up to speak, I was like, oh my goodness, this guy's got a gift. And what he could do, for the kingdom. So it's just been great to see how God's taken you and used you in so many different ways through the years. I'm so grateful God moved us together there, connected us together. I love the story.
Let me just add one thing.
Yeah.
Not that we all need so many details, but I've always owed Roger so much. Roger and Marcia, but Marcia was always sort of she was nice. She was sweet. She was nice to me. Roger, and not that Roger wasn't, but Roger often found himself in the position at 29 years old to put me in a headlock. And Roger's the one that pulled me aside in the cry room of the Charleston Church of Christ. They had a cry. If you've never been to a church building, you know what a cry room. It's this room, and it's the nursery in the back with a big glass window so you can watch the speaker. You can hear the services. And he pulled me back there on a Tuesday, I think it was. It was the day after Valentine's Day in 1977. And he was concerned about my relationship with Lisa. He was concerned about my my being serious, my direction. And he pulled me aside and basically said, "You need to shape up." And I left, and Lisa was working as his secretary. And I went over and I grabbed Lisa's hand. I said, "Come here." And she left the building. We got in that barely light blue. It was mostly rusty, that Mustang. And I drove her out to a field of snow, and I told her she was going to marry me. And she laughed, and by the end of the year, we got married. But that all came from the talk. Roger's like, "You better shape up." And the first thing I did was tell Lisa, "Okay, you're going to marry me. Let's go." And she said, "No way." She said, "When is this going to happen?" I said, "Before the year's over." She goes, "Uh-uh." And so before the year was over, I squeezed it in December 18th. But Roger, I got a zillion things to thank you for. Nothing bigger than that. Nothing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I actually owe you a lot too, because believe it or not, I was very non-confrontational because I'd been taught by the traditional church indirect confrontation, and you never talked about something to somebody. And the part of the teaching that came out of Crossroads is no, you need to be involved in each other's lives and speak the truth in love. And you were the first person I sat down with, and I was so nervous and I was so anxious about how this was going to go, but I loved you so much, and I just felt compelled to challenge you. So that was a great experience for me, actually. So thank you for listening.
You were easy to listen to. and always loved you very much.
Well, you too, very much. And Elisa, um, I love the story about the New York planting and what God did there. Could you sort of give a little bit of that detail on how the church was planted? Because a lot of people think that those early churches were planted the way we do it now, but that was not the way
No,
it happened then.
the Boston, in my opinion, Boston in that time and that was a unique time. Now, on a side note, in Christendom, on a side note to the side note, Roger and I grew up in the Church of Christ. I've been in the Church of Christ. At 8 years old, I knew I was going to be a preacher. I believe the only thing serious in life was God. And all I ever heard was we're supposed to seek and save the lost. And consequently, you get this mindset that we still in the ICOC, it's the whole idea we're the only ones saved. And I still believe that when you read the Bible, there's not two churches, three, there's one church. Jesus built one church, but I've lived long enough now to see, in the arc of my life there, I believe that God's got one church in the Lamb's Book of Life, and I hope to goodness my name's written in it. But I think most people would have trouble ever saying any particular group or organization is the only way, the only one. Not that Jesus isn't the only way, and I don't believe there's a zillion roads to get to God.
Yeah,
I think it's got to go through Jesus. But I mean, right now. So how would you say this group is going to heaven and that group isn't? We used to joke, in the Church of Christ, someone went to heaven and God was showing them around and said, that's where the Baptists are, and that's where the Methodists are, and that's where the Catholics are. And they heard some singing, a cappella singing coming from over the hill. And God said, shh, that's the Church of Christ. They think they're the only ones here. That's how I grew up. Theologically, theologically, I still believe it's a narrow way, few that be that find it. But I have been wrong, I would guess, more than I've been right in my life as a preacher, as someone that's supposed to teach. There have been so many things that I've taught that I think I was wrong. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't make me innocent. And so this is all prep. You ask about planning the New York church. To me, Boston was unique because Crossroads in the 60s, 65, somewhere in there, the Encyclopedia Britannica. Remember that? Remember, anyone ever read it? No, anyone know? You youngsters know what an encyclopedia? Dr. Richard, do you remember
Yes.
encyclopedia?
Yes, I copied a lot of homework off of that encyclopedia.
Okay, well, that used to be our internet, was the encyclopedia, and that was Google. Our Google was the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it listed the Church of Christ as the fastest growing church in the world. Somewhere around 1965, 1966. And Roger, maybe you remember the numbers, but I always get confused if the Church of Christ worldwide, because they had, go find the encyclopedia, we'll see what it said. It either said the Church of Christ had 1.5 million or 3 million worldwide. I can't remember. I'm playing with numbers in my head, but it was over 1 million.
I think it was 1 million something.
Million, okay, then about 1.5 million is what it said worldwide. And shortly after that article came out, the growth of the Church of Christ just came to a screeching halt. It just stopped. And from my preteen to teen years, I went to church all the time. I went to youth rallies all the time. I even went to conferences. In those days, if you're in the Church of Christ, you go to Christian colleges for a conference, for a lectureship. And all you would hear about on evangelism was, we've stopped growing, we're dying. Well, the last one to leave the Church of Christ, please turn off the lights. I remember a speaker who said that. And then this is what and you got to remember, at that age, 5, 6 years from preteen church boy to teenage church boy, going to all these meetings and hearing this. That's all I heard for 5, 6 years. So that at that age in life, that's a long time. And then I am 18, 19 years old, and I hear about Crossroads. And I first heard it from Roger. He said, we got a campus minister coming from Crossroads, what's that? And Chuck Lucas had started a ministry there in Gainesville, Florida. And there they'd started baptizing in the late 60s, early 70s, started baptizing hundreds and hundreds of kids. In fact, there was an article that came out in the Gainesville, the Gator, the University of Florida paper. When you come to college here, the 2 most likely things to happen to you are to get run over by a 10-speed bicycle or get invited to a soul talk. They called them soul talks. And that's where our Bible talk evolved.
Yeah.
It was, I visited, for me personally, growing up in the Church of Christ, I'm a weirdo. I know I'm weird, but one of the things about a weirdo is you think everything else is weird. And I'd never seen people hug or men hug men. We grew up in a very homophobic, very, very, hug girls. I like that. When I visited and I saw people were hugging, I like that. Hug the girls. Yeah, I'm in for that. Hug the guys. I'd stick hello, my name is, and as weird as that sounds, because now even, times have changed and until COVID, you could see all sorts of people hugging all the time. But back in those days, guys didn't hug guys, except at this weird Crossroads church. They were baptizing so many people. There was so much dynamic stuff happening. And like I said, I'd met Kip. He was a campus minister for me. And then he moved to Boston, invited us to come up and to work with him there. And the unique thing about Boston, and yeah, I can take this much time. Any question you ask me, I can preface for an hour to get to it, Raj. You know that.
And about the church planning.
Boston was unique because in Boston, Chuck in Gainesville and the Crossroads Church had it was a very defined package. Guys wear blue blazers, wear khaki pants, sharp, that whole sharp stuff that's fraternity stuff from Gainesville, Florida. Kip was different. There was something about we had people from the Christian churches visiting. We had people from Churches of Christ coming. We had all sorts, and we had started day one just baptizing kids off of Boston University, Harvard, MIT. Believe it or not, I started the Bible talks at MIT. I haven't, the smartest people in the world, but they don't know squat about the Bible. But it was just amazing to see. But it was more. It was more of a melting pot. It wasn't. It didn't look like Boston became its own thing, and it was a very unique place. So one day we had a camp. Kip started a ministries training program. First, I think there were 8 of us, and then every semester it would grow until eventually, almost all of the Bible talk leaders and everybody, we had this room of about 60, 70 people. And we were assigned, let's all study all the countries around the world and decide if you had to go there, which city would you pick? And so we had teams. So these 60, 70 people break up into teams. We divide up all the countries in the world. Of course, we all pick cities that either were the obvious metro mecca of that country or had the biggest universities. That's what, and we had posters. I guess you'd call them vision boards. We put posters up. We're going here, we're going here, we're going here, we're going here. And until that time, I didn't really have, I knew that Jesus said to go into all the world, I knew we were supposed to go into all the world, and I knew we were doing some great things in Boston. I didn't want to leave Boston. I wanted to stay in Boston the rest of my life. It was heaven for me. Lisa can tell you another story. It was harder for her, but it was. I just loved it. But when we had those posters, it was the first time I had it wasn't just an idea. Or I said, this can be done. Fred's holding his poster of Finland or whatever he had. And I thought, yeah, Fred will go there. Jim and Doug have their London poster. At that time, now that's true. The rest I'm making up because it would become, Frank and Erica go to Japan, Scott and Lynn go to China. In that room with those posters in the basement of this Baptist church, Arlington Baptist Church, it became clear we can do this. This is totally doable, and we're going to do this. And since I need to answer your question, there's a lot of little details in it, but it worked out to where the opportunity came that Kip, the elders, everybody, basically they said, spin the globe. We'll send you and Lisa anywhere you want to go. And we picked New York at the end because New York, Jesus said, go into all the world. If you're in New York, all the world comes to you. And you got to speak English or New York again. Anyway.
Yeah. Amen.
So there wasn't a language. So there wasn't a language to learn. And we eventually got together with a group. There were 18 of us. And I've got behind me over here a gift that the New York church gave us a few years ago. It's an elevator. The buttons you push in an elevator, it's a panel. Because 18 of us met in Tom Grintz's apartment, our first service. And we were coming down in the elevator. All of us were coming down. We had church. We're going to go out and eat together. We're all in the elevator. And I said, let's make this the last time the church fits in one elevator. And the Lord really blessed us. We over the years, we grew, but it was one of the most amazing experiences to get to be a part of, to get to do, and so
That's awesome.
you got any more
I
questions?
think you were just the second planting, right?
Well, when did Chicago? Yes, London went first. Jim and Doug went in '82,
Okay.
And then we went in the summer of '83. But Chicago started about the same time.
Chicago was 81 or 2. So it was Chicago, London, and
30.
then New York. So you were third. But I think what's so phenomenal to me was, the Crossroads had this mission to plant a campus ministry on every campus in the U.S., which was a huge dream. It was goal. But when we saw these churches fracturing by having the campus ministries so vibrant, then Kip and the Boston leadership said, maybe we shouldn't go in and cause problems. Maybe we should just start churches. That was a very wise thing, and it was by faith. And then it was, we're going to plant churches around the world, like Steve said, and none of us were old enough to think we couldn't do it. And then the faith was just, yes, it'll happen. Didn't know how it would happen, who all would do it, where the money would come from. It was just, Jesus said, do this, let's go. And then you got your team of 18 people to go there. And how big did the church eventually get, Steve?
Well, I know because in those days we kept pretty good records of things, and the numbers. Let's let this be the official thing to clear it up. At our largest, we almost had 6,000 members. At the end of 2002, and because of the way we accounted for things, I mean, we had name. We're talking about people coming to church, and now we would have on a big Sunday, we would regularly have between 8,500 and 10,000 people at church. We met at Madison Square Garden 2 or 3 times.
Mhm.
But the largest the church ever got was almost 6,000 people.
Yeah.
And
And then you planted churches out of New York that started reaching continents, right?
well, in the when we went to New York at that time, the dream, the idea was we all wanted to imitate Boston. And we wanted to be our own. We thought the way to evangelize the world is let's just go and we'll do what Boston was doing. But now you got London, you got Chicago, you got New York. I think we'd started to merge in, some other churches, and we planted a few more churches in the States and around. But essentially, you had all of us competing with each other. We went through a phase where I want to plant a church in New Delhi. And London said, no, I want to plant a church in New Delhi. And someone said, no, I'll plant a church in New Delhi. and we were all racing. How many flags can we plant, for our own little Boston kingdom? And I remember the talk that I was instrumental in, where I advised, why don't we just take inventory? And if I've got people in India and someone else had to plant the church over there, I'd rather encourage whoever is the best to do it. Let's work together. And that's where the world sectors came from.
Right.
It was a conversation that I had. Now, all of the intricacies and the rules and the world sector, the names and I take no credit for that. But yeah. I was in a very dynamic situation with a very growing church in a multicultural, multinational congregation, right, with people going. And we could have said, well, we're going to plant a church everywhere. But we decided to be united and to work together. And that was where the idea came from. Well, London's got England, the British Commonwealth has all these ties, which it gets us into a later part of this conversation, colonialism and a lot of stuff. But there were certain things that visas, passports, colleges where people were, cities where people were, it just made sense. Right. And I've been lucky my whole life. I got Africa. The first church we planted was actually to Brazil. The Tollivers were with us, and Mike is probably the single most talented person I've ever known in my life, which means to say Amberjeet is probably the smartest and best person, because there would be no Mike without Amberjeet. But we picked Sao Paulo, Brazil, because it was like the New York of the Southern Hemisphere. But when we decided to all agree and work together, then my responsibility was in Africa. And I told Mike, you can stay inside. You planted the church. He loved the church there. He planted. And Mike agreed to stay. He said, well, I'd rather stay with you. And he ended up going to Africa and doing the most phenomenal work I've ever seen anyone do over there. So yeah.
That's awesome, Steve. That's really good. It's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Absolutely. Well, I guess this is where I come in. Steve, when you went to New York, that's when I became more familiar with you. At the time, I was in South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And we were just about to go through a major transition of reconstruction to be more aligned with some of the bonds that I had come to know you through the newsletters that you would send out. And we would read, and I was a young minister at the time. I was leading campus, and then I was also leading a house church and so forth. And I was an avid fan of yours. And of course, your relationship with Roger, you've known each other for many years. For me, it was just knowing you from afar and seeing your work and reading your articles and Lisa's articles and seeing you on videos and so forth. So I guess I was a fan from afar, seeing your, upside down video, things like that. But one of the things that I remember is I remember reading an article where you and Lisa were interviewed, and you talked about this concept of fun and fruit in New York. And I remember that it struck me and my little band of disciples, while we were leading this campus and leading, house church, the whole idea of fun and fruit. And I remember really talking to our group about this and say, guys, this is what we need to do. This is what Steve and Lisa are doing in New York. The church is exploding up there. We need to have fun and we need to have fruit, right? So we did that. We actually did that. We implemented the whole idea of fun fruit in our family house church and on the and I'm not saying this to boast, but our family group became known as the most fruitful one in our group of family churches. And they would ask us, so what are you doing? What are you guys doing? And we're just trying to be disciples and we're trying to have fun, trying to baptize and have, fruit. And so for many years, what you did in New York, and of course, New York has a special place in my heart because I was born there. And so I don't know how I ended up not going to New York to be a part of the ministry there. I don't know how that, well, I guess probably because I was on staff.
Sin.
And so, yeah. Had to question my commitment at that point, right? But I was on staff. And so, but I wanted to ask you, you have, a long history. You're considered, one of the great pillars along. You've seen us, our ups, our downs, and and ups again and downs again. What would you say are the ways that we have grown over the years? Like, if you look back, what are some ways that we as a movement have grown? And then the second part of that question, and what are some ways that we still need to grow? We lack in certain things and opportunities for us to really take it higher. So what are some ways that we've grown? What are some ways that we need to
Boy, wow. If you could read thought bubbles, there's about 7 different thought bubbles going on right now. And whatever, the way God made me, some people call it self-deprecating. There's an actor in me. I mean, I was probably at 8 years old, I knew I needed to be a preacher. God's the only serious thing. I'm going to go to hell if I'm not a preacher. And I'm the oldest of all my siblings. And from a young age, I always felt responsible. You're responsible. And that's how some people lead from their ego is manifest in a leader one way or another. My ego, whatever, is tied up in I'm responsible. God's going to hold me accountable for this. But the monkey inside me, the goofball inside me, was probably just supposed to paint pictures or, goof around with kids on a stage, not that I can play the guitar well. I mean, I'm prefacing it this way because what goes on in my head when you ask me that question is there's probably a number of personalities whom I respect very much, a lot. I love that probably feel like I'm the last person who should get to answer that question. Because what I think is so great, how God blessed us. I've lived long enough, and I consider myself young no matter what I look like. I told you guys earlier, I shaved my beard just thinking, watch this. I grew this big gnarly beard and then they canceled Christmas on my street. I grew the beard, I told everybody, well, I have a once a year gig that involves children and international travel and but because of COVID, we're not my street is a Christmas street and we've canceled it.
Yeah. Oh
I
my.
shaved the beard because I said, watch, I'm going to shave the beard and I'm going to look so young. Oh, no, I just look old and fat. But
You'll always be young to me, Steve.
thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you. But my point being, I've lived long enough let me start this sentence this way. In our fellowship, beings maybe our roots were in the Church of Christ, beings maybe we were very tunnel vision, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. We were very, very focused. We didn't care or know what Billy Graham was doing. We didn't care or know what Campus Crusade. We didn't care. We God put us here to save the world, and no one's doing it right, and we've got to do it. And I've lived long enough to see that a lot of things that when you study church history, it might take 100 or 200 years to do because of the time we lived, because of jets, because you realize that mine is the first generation. Our DNA has no genetic memory of jet lag until now that we know of. Now, unless we're wrong or angels really are aliens or something. I mean, we're the first people to ever go through jet lag. And the time we lived in, for us, it was jets and international travel and phones. We did so much before internet, before cell phones, before all of that. We squeezed in 25 years, I would argue, in 25 years, when you go back in church history, it would take 100 or 200 years. Not that we're that awesome. It's just the time we lived in, it was so fast.
Yeah.
I always believed and hoped and dreamed that group in Boston, that we'd be friends until we died, that we'd be each other's pallbearers, that we would be, and some of us don't talk anymore. It's like every MTV history of the band, you know. I mean, it's like every story you see that involves biographies, and certainly there are some of the guys and gals are still friends and still close, but we essentially saw in 25 years something happen, and I'm thankful for that, because to get to be a part of it and to see it. And usually when things end as badly as that 25-year segment ended, usually there's heads chopped off. I mean, it's usually worse than just. Now, when I say there is a thing that started in 1979 and ended in 2003, whatever that thing is. There's still an ICOC. I'm still in the same fellowship. We're still going. But when you ask me, I believe that we were a very faithful group of people. I'm doing not like I do this a lot. It just so happens I'm doing a thing with some young people at 6 o'clock tonight, Lord willing, a live thing, where they wanted to talk about Ground Jesus, and they wanted to talk about the fact that from the first Upside Down, I've always cast a non-white Jesus. And one of the things, especially right now with, I still struggle with what are the right words to say, because I'll tell you everything I think and believe about it, but with the current latest stuff going on about racism, which only reveals for us white people, we've never been as far along as we thought. Oh, there's still a problem there? What? Huh? White people can check out of that problem anytime we want to in this country. being the majority. I mean, I can watch Friends and not see any black people, it's syndicated, I can't, and I can do that and not even think about the fact I'm just watching white people. I mean, white people can step out of that all the time. I want to say something, and I say this because Scott Green's gone on to meet our maker. Gloria Baird's gone on to meet our maker. So on the leader level, people who have gone on, a number of other brothers and sisters, certainly many hundreds, maybe thousands have gone on. In our time, I believe we were very unique because I cast a non-white Jesus and our fellowship applauded. And I want to sink that in. This is in 1987, and not to mention Jesus had a Rolex watch on when he got ascended into heaven. But that's a whole nother story. My point isn't, hey, Steve cast. My point is, we cast a non-white Jesus.
Yeah.
And our fellowship applauded. Now, let me make it really clear. I believe that there is such a thing, such a huge thing of white privilege. People that are denying it, people that are wanting to say that's divisive. People, I'm just in disagreement. The kindest way I can say is I'm in disagreement. Yeah. There is, in my opinion, many others, but there is such a thing as white privilege that we gotta. If I would challenge anyone, if you can't say that, at least understand inside out, up and down, front and backwards, why so many of us are talking about it and grappling with it. There is, I believe, such a thing as systemic racism.
Yep.
I believe it. I believe it affects our police. I believe there is such a thing as just an unfair, a disproportionate, a total light and darkness difference in how white people are treated by the police categorically and how people of color are treated. I believe that's, I know many people disagree. I believe that's a fact. And so I believe there's things we've got, and I believe that our fellowship, having started in America, sent people all over the world. It started, there was a dominant white culture that started our fellowship. But we were aware of that, for what it's worth. We sat in rooms in Boston saying, we don't want to be a white church. And we started sending churches out saying, we don't want to be an American church.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that in respect of people who've gone on, and in respect of a lot of people, that needs to be acknowledged that we cast a non-white Jesus 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But the other answer to your question, where can we go for it? We have more trouble today being progressive than we've ever had in our fellowship.
Yeah.
We are doing the exact, and let me say, and remember, there's some guys that are super smart and love the Lord and are going to heaven ahead of me that disagree with everything I'm about to say right now. But I think we stopped. We got into the same kind of thing that all religious movements do and all churches do. And we have cemented what our doctrine, what our theology is. We've got a couple of things that I don't even want to use the word embroiled. With COTIV, I don't feel embroiled in anything except this discussion about race. There's some embroiling going on with that. But the big issue for me right now are the people that I've made unhappy, that Lisa and I have made unhappy in the discussion about women. And acknowledging I'm a white, middle-aged, old guy, one of the most powerful creatures in the universe. I acknowledge all of that. And so some of the things I say can reflect the fact that I'm not woke on this or that. For me, the equality discussion that's going on with Black Lives Matter is the exact same discussion that needs to be going on about women. What we're really talking about is, what do we believe happened with the fall of man? When we lost the garden, what happened? And the idea that someone can be dominant because of their gender or because of their color, to me, I just don't buy it. And now I say that at the same time, I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm as young as I feel, I'm too old to hurt anybody. And the stuff I'm thinking and some of the things that we're doing that irritates people, it's hurting some people. And I'm trying to figure out how to have the convictions I've got and believe what I've got without hurting people. We have a younger group of people that have no patience for what I'm saying right now. It's been your fear of hurting people. It's been your waffling on that. You've not taken a stand. And I know through the years, there's been a lot. There's the stories we could all tell on each other. Roger, the stories we could tell on each other, right? I mean, any story I could tell you about people I've protected from so-and-so, there's someone that's protected somebody from me. God forgive me, you know,
Right.
but I
Grace.
believe right now in our fellowship, in the 80s, midnight, a girl wants to get baptized on the Upper East Side. She has to call a brother to come over and ring in and get up to the apartment and baptize the woman in the bathtub with the girl standing around. And my dad, my old Church of Christ dad, said, "Why are you doing that? The Bible says for all disciples to go make disciples. Why don't you just let the woman baptize the woman?"
Mhm.
What?
That was radical.
Woman? It was. It caused an argument. It caused a stir. I won't name names, but his initials are Doug Arthur. Doug's in London. We're over here. New York starts letting women baptize women in the services. We're doing it in the apartments. We can't do it. No, can't do it. You know? And Doug, who's one of my best friends ever in the history of best friends, he says, "You got marriage and you got baptism. Those are like the, you know, you can't let women do that. What are you going to do? Let a woman do a wedding?" Well, the next wedding we had in New York, Lisa presided with me. That's what this is almost 40 years ago, guys.
Amen. Wow.
Now, I would say with my tongue, I don't even have to put my tongue in my cheek. When you asked how many, we got the last 10 years of the New York ministry, there wasn't a year, even 2002, that we didn't have over 1,000 baptisms in a year. Now, by 2002, people were going out the back door as fast as they're coming in the front door. When I tell you we had 6,000 members, we had to have baptized at least 70 to 80,000 people in my 20 years in New York. So think about that. Some of those people went to other churches. And I've become mature enough to say they didn't all leave Jesus when they left our congregation. But there was something going on from the beginning to there's something, you know, with that arc. But when we had a situation where the girls were calling the guys to come up and we figured out there's nothing in the scriptures that prohibit, and the women that was when the women started baptizing women publicly, that was huge.
Yeah.
For a skinny New York minute. And then, when I was putting my tongue in my cheek a while ago, we were baptizing enough people pretty much to do whatever we wanted. And people wanted to do whatever New York was doing.
Yeah.
And that's the superficial, that's the Steve's being a little flip answer. I think it's true.
Mhm.
But the reality was we were progressive.
Yeah.
We didn't, we very often were saying, why not?
Mhm.
What's the restriction? We were a non-instrumental Church of Christ movement when we started. It was in 1987, 88. It was after Upside Down. So it had to be 88, either the end of 87 or 88 that Kip did the Wine, Women, and Song sermon. And up until then, even though Sherwin and I had written these musicals in my services, because I was a good Church of Christ boy, we stopped the service. The service is now official, an a cappella service, and we'd have a concert or something after the service, seamlessly right there at the same, because you can't have instrumental music, during church. That all, one sermon, and that all changed. And when you now and the truth is, I try to think all the time, how can I have the beliefs or convictions if my convictions and beliefs run against so many people that I love and respect? What am I going to do? I don't really know. I don't know what to do, but I think there certainly is an argument. Being progressive doesn't mean you stop going by the scriptures. But as I've gotten older and read more, my view of how to read the scriptures has changed. And so anyway, I don't know if that answers your question or if I just rambled around.
No, Steve, it did. Because you actually brought up, the other issues that I was going to bring up, but I think you covered it, and those were the reasons why you were really admired as well, kingdom wide. Your forthrightness about race. I mean, I remember you saying you didn't allow people to make racial jokes around you, and you said this 40 years ago, and I was stunned by that comment. And of course Lisa, Lisa, you and Lisa had you transformed the way we do ministry in terms of women. I mean, it was revolutionary and radical and encouraging and pleasing at the same time. So.
Well, I just wanted to interject. That came, it's we in this country with media and with everything, we go through phases where it becomes fashionable to confess sins or to and to make. I was a little racist kid. I mean, that's just a fact. I was a cute little boy. I was a chubby little white boy with a flat top haircut. But I used the N-word probably until the last time I can remember using it was in the 5th grade. So I would have been I was 10 years old. And it wasn't it was, I lived in segregated Arkansas. It was just, it's just the culture. Something changed. There was something different about my mom and dad. Mom was more consistent than dad. Mom had grown up in a very devout Church of Christ home with a very kind father who didn't believe in treating people of color any different, which was really hard in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s in Arkansas. And he was a sharecropper himself at times.
Wow.
That was my mom's dad. My dad came from a whole different, just degenerate side of life, really. But he got converted now looking back at a fairly young age. I remember Dad. I remember when it happened, Dad trying to find a Church of Christ that would let a Black family get baptized in their baptistry. We had to drive all the way to Little Rock to do it. And now I remember that same Dad at other times. I remember a Black family coming wanting to go to church with us out in the middle of a soybean field in Arkansas, and they were told they had to go down to their place. So when if you're going to say that you get if we try to follow Jesus just a little bit, these things don't always come easy. It's not like I was born any different than anybody. I was born into a place where you judged by color. I would be 19 years old before I'd be able to look at you, Richard, and tell the difference between you and Otta. It was just, it's a couple of black guys, it was, there is a thing, and you guys are smarter than me. There's even a name for it in psychology, and people of all colors do it. How you see color. When you see a group of people, there's a bunch of white people, it's a bunch of brown people, it's a bunch of Asian people or something.
Yeah.
I was 19 years old and went to live with Bob Brown and his wife Kelly down in Trinidad. The population of Trinidad at that time was 3% white. It was mostly islanders who had descended from, there were very, very few people that were indigenous there. And then you had Indians from India, of course. African slave trade brought people there. It was predominantly black. It was the first time I'd ever been a minority in my life. And I was there for 3 months, and I started looking at a guy, like I'm looking, and I thought, that guy looks exactly like my cousin David. I mean, his nose, his eye, and he's acting like David, a little chubby guy. What? And it occurred to me, wait a second, David's white, this guy's black. It was the first I realized that I'd stopped looking at people. Now, this gets us into the topic of colorblind, because this is 1975. And Bob Brown's feeding me all sorts of stuff to read about racism. And he was the first teacher I ever had. Well, the only teacher before Bob Brown, when I was 14, I read Bury My Heart, It Wounded Me. And I lost every patriotic bone in my body when I understood what had happened in Manifest Destiny and how Native Americans have been treated. But it was Bob that started giving me books and talking about racism. And it's 1975. And the cool thing, the Christian thing, is to be colorblind, is to look at someone and not see color, just see a soul, just see a person, but it's taken a lot of us 40 years to understand whatever good comes from hitting that switch in your brain where you don't look at someone and judge them by their color. There's a switch right next to it that you've got to understand how color, a person of color should not have to assimilate into a white culture to be accepted. This guy looks just, anyway, I'm running out of words. I'm going to stop. You know what I'm talking? Am I saying anything halfway pertinent? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So for a lot
I
of
think
people,
the issue of color blindness and really being able to, value people for who they are, but this issue of color blindness has become so confused, in our society right now. I really appreciate everything that you've shared, Steve. I think it's I think you mentioned sometimes there's a phase that we go through in society where it's popular to confess. I think, to me, I've seen, different snippets of you here and there over time. And I think you've always had this heart where it doesn't matter if it's popular or not. You've been someone who's been very open. And I think especially right now, the issue of, sharing about, our past and some of the ways we may not, fit how we should, quote, in society today, or really how God wants us to. I think sharing about that can really be very challenging. So I definitely appreciate, just your sharing. I do have a question. I know you mentioned you've read some books that have helped you from Native American history, and then I think you mentioned Bob Green, or Brown.
Bob Brown, yeah.
Okay. Have you read Michael Burns's book, Escaping the Beast?
I've read parts of it. Michael has been our guest here, so I read enough so I wasn't an idiot. I think Michael's brilliant. I did not read it as thoroughly as I read my favorite, Dr. Rodriguez's book. But
yeah, no, it's a very good book. I would commend that to you.
Michael is, and I'm not just blowing smoke. Not only he's brilliant, I want to say he says what I think. I want to think that,
Yeah,
the stuff he lays out, because this whole thing, all lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter. That comes from two places. There is a bad place. There listen, guys, we have racists. They do exist.
Yeah.
There are people that hate people that are not the same color, and they can tie it all up in heritage and all sorts of things. There is such a thing as racism, but it also comes from us neoliberals of the 70s who wanted to be colorblind. Black Lives Matter. Wait a second. All lives. Wait, I don't. Stephen Colbert made a fortune, on TV, playing the character that says, "Oh, I don't see color. I don't see color." From a neoliberal of the 70s, as funny as that is, and as touchy as it is, for some of us, it really is true. Some of us went through such intense, intentional changing. If there's a group of Black kids coming down the sidewalk at midnight, are you as likely to cross the sidewalk? I lived in New York. I intentionally would not cross the sidewalk, whoever was coming. I thought, worst case scenario, I'll have a great sharing my faith story, with or without a Black. I mean, there are some of us who went through such an intentional, I don't want to see color. I don't want to see, I just want to see.
Right.
But what a lot of us don't understand is we were the predominant race. That was a good thing for us to have to do. But now there's another good thing. We're supposed good. It's almost like I ride motor. You're going to ask me, I'll answer now. You said, what do you do for fun? Sometimes I ride motorcycles. Right now I pick up poop for 2 puppies that weigh 55 pounds each, But it's like you ride you get a license to ride a motorcycle. And then you think you're a great motorcycle rider. But there's a guy that goes over to the track and he can ride with his knee down. And there's another guy that can make his motorcycle do flips in the air, For a lot of us, we don't understand. Yeah, we learned how to ride the race motorcycle. That's a good step. But don't think you've got it mastered. For people of color, the challenge is you guys are as big a sinner as anybody. You Black guys, you brown guys, we're all sinners.
Right.
But there's different challenges of what Black and brown brothers and sisters especially have to learn, especially if they spent 40 years needing to assimilate into a predominantly white thinking. Our church, again, I want to praise our fellowship. From the start, our ambition, and we were quickly successful, we wanted to be multiracial, we wanted to be multinational, and we wanted our leadership to reflect that. And we had to get through, you talk about the mental gymnastics for a poor, I'm playing the white guys. Feel sorry for the old white man over here. Is the things you have to do is, I'm not appointing this guy evangelist because he's Black. I'm appointing him evangelist because he's talented. He gets it. And thank God he's Black. That's the challenges for someone who's Black or brown in our fellowship to deal with people like me. Well, Steve's a nice guy and Steve sees things different, but it's taken me 40 years to realize that the umbrella over me was colonialism. The umbrella over me was institutional racism. I'm different. If you'd ask any of us 40 years ago, are you anti-racist? We didn't use that phrase, but are you? Well, I'm not pro-racist. Yeah, I'm anti-racist. But it all means I gotta talk about that for a second. I'm right here. I just gotta let the puppy out. Just 1 second.
Can I make a comment on what he just said?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm really glad he brought up the motorcycle illustration, because it's been a progression of growing and maturing to me. The colorblind idea was so radical at the time, and it addressed the racism and overt racism that was going on. And so to those of us that wanted to do a biblical view of all people from God's point of view, yes, that makes sense. We're not going to see you first as what color you are, but look at your soul and look at your spirit. Now that, as anything we do, that will take on a life of its own. And it did, and it stunted us stunted me to be comfortable in that. And I love what Steve said about, no, let's go to the racetrack and let's learn how to put our knee down. On the racetrack, there's a whole nother realm. And that's what I think is going on now, is we're being taken to a whole nother level of maturity and understanding, hopefully. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think maybe you can just wrap it up for us, Roger. I think if you can maybe just say a few words to Steve. And
sure. Well, there was that one time, Steve, when you
One?
no.
Only one?
One he can share publicly.
We can share. Sometime you should do an interview and just let Steve tell you stories about baptisms and weird things preachers have said.
oh, I heard one of those, a cat.
A very, very entertaining. He's got a whole monologue on it. That's great. Steve, I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for you and your love for God, for your hearing the call, and for your being real about yourself and being honest in your own discipleship, for you making a very smart decision to marry Lisa. Love God, marry up. That's the secret to life. But just for how you've let God use you all these years in all these ways. We haven't even talked about the whole daytime ministry thing that was just so profound. Wow. And many other things. And I know you've been through a lot of turmoil, a lot of different things. I've walked with you for a couple of hours, different times, and you drove me somewhere for a few hours just so we could decompress with each other. And I just, I love your heart for God, your love for people. And thank you so much for all these years of faithfulness.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Wait, we're done? I can't talk more? Thank
I
you.
do remember one other thing I do want to share real quick is something I always remember is, I think this was told to me by my discipler, Lyman Morgan, when we were in Boston. I was actually in Boston for some years in the 90s. And he said that, I think you'd shared a lesson essentially in reference to discipleship. And the point was that God works through our discipleship, not because the person says something to us is perfect or says it perfect, but because we have a humble heart to get into the mode of discipleship, that God uses that humble heart to really help us to change and become what he wants to. And that really did something for me, because you're never going to have a perfect discipler. And I think just the way that you think about things and the different things that you say just have a way of providing a truth that's undeniable and has helped me, and I'm sure many disciples, get through, different circumstances. So thank you very much for that. And also as a disciple who was in the churches in Africa, I know, as you said, you didn't coin the term world sector leaders, but I know you definitely were one, some years back, and, you oversaw Africa. And I think through your leadership and Natalifa's leadership, we were definitely able to get to, many, many continents and still have churches in a lot of those places. So, definitely thank you for your efforts. Even though you may feel like you're picking up, poop for two 50-pound dogs, you definitely are a hero.
Well, I definitely am picking up poop. That's not I'm not thinking that. That's a fact. That's a fact. Thank you. Thanks so much for all of your kind words, and thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah. For those of you that definitely enjoy the episode, please subscribe. I know Steve also has a YouTube channel. I'll try to link that for you guys also. And then we'll go from there. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.